The curator of history here at the museum. So she curates all the history shows, develops the history collection, and obviously works with Claudio on this exhibition. So I'm going to turn it over to her and her brilliant mind to lead you all through the exhibition. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Good to see everyone. Thank you for being here. Such an important program project today. As Elizabeth mentioned, my name is Alicia Romero. I'm the history curator here at the Albuquerque Museum, and I've said this many times. Every time Claudio sees me, and I say the same thing, so it's like a broken record. This is probably one of the most important exhibitions that I've ever had the honor of curating and working with community to curate. This really is a community partnership with this. Although, you know, Claudio has been in Albuquerque for quite some time, has taught at Sandia Prep for quite some time, and all of these students are Albuquerque residents, right? Come from Albuquerque families in New Mexico. So having exposed them to the really difficult realities that many of us don't have to face, right? Because of our own privilege or because of our own status in society. Teaching students about the realities of immigration, particularly at the southern border, and bringing those realities and those stories to our audience here at the Albuquerque Museum has been really incredible, not just for me as a history curator, but for our visiting public to the Albuquerque Museum, and I think for the students as well to be able to share their work with their families and the people that they know that may not ordinarily come to the Albuquerque Museum. So this exhibition called Puertas Fronterizas, Border Doors, is a result of many months, maybe a year or so,
yeah.
A little bit. We were on a tighter timeline than we usually are for exhibition development and production. But as soon as I heard about what Claudio has been doing for more than 10 years, maybe close to 20, something like that, 14 years, has been, I just knew we had to share it with our audiences. So I had the great pleasure of visiting the doors over and over again, wherever they are stashed in the halls and the basements and the water closets of Sandia Prep, and selecting the doors that I thought represented the stories. And you know what you'll see here, these are all works of art, right? I'm not an art curator, I'm a history curator, as Elizabeth mentioned and I mentioned myself. But we're putting this exhibition in historical context. That's how I can justify where this is a history exhibit, because immigration isn't something that just happened in the last 5 years, right? It is something that has deep historical roots since before we became the United States of America, since before we were part of the Mexican Republic, and since before we became part of the broad colony of Spain, right? Colonial Mexico, right? People move. This is part of human nature. People move around, whether we're talking about in Europe, in Asia, throughout Africa, and certainly in the Americas. Now we just have politics attached to that. So we can come in the gallery. We'll kind of walk through the room, and I'll talk about what each of the sections hopes to accomplish. I will let you know from the outset that I don't have interpretation about what all of the doors mean, the symbolism, the iconography. That maybe would be a job for our art curators, but where students have produced student statements written in either or both English and Spanish, we have QR codes on the labels next to their names. So you are free and welcome to access those QR codes. All of these student statements that are available to us are also available on our website. So you can go to our website if you don't take pictures of the QR codes or access them in here. And that way you can hear the students talk about the doors from their own perspectives, right, in their own words. So please, let's go in.
Gracias por venir.
Sí, claro que sí.
Este es Marvin.
Hola,
Mucho gusto.
mucho gusto. Me vas a tener que ayudar, ¿eh?
Sí.
Okay, so we'll let everybody funnel in. Did you give him an intro to the project?
Yes, I did.
Okay, so then I don't have to go through a lot of those details, but so this is our smaller history gallery. We do rotating exhibitions in here twice a year. We change them out, and this one has by far been the most popular, which makes me super proud, as I mentioned before. What we wanted to do with this installation was this text panel here. It was very intentional the way that we wrote all of the text for this exhibition. I privileged the Spanish before the English. Typically when we do exhibitions at the Albuquerque Museum, they are all bilingual, but we start off with English first and Spanish last. This time we decided to reverse those two languages for their placement, right? To kind of heighten the importance and the people that this exhibition is about, right? That largely speak Spanish in addition to other and many indigenous languages where they're from. So we introduce our public with some of this text panel. I'll talk about the corner area at the end of this show. What we included here also to help people understand and give them a little bit of context, because many of our visitors, well, I don't say many of, our visitors may not know about the wide and varied immigrant experience to the United States, especially from people in Latin America or people that are not from Latin America but are migrating via Latin America, right? One of the things that we thought was important to include is this not very high resolution graphic of a Red Cross map that is routinely available to people throughout Mexico, as we know that people are going to come northward, however they can get northward. This was a very controversial map because it was assumed that this map was encouraging people to migrate northward. It's just providing information. And that's kind of one of the goals of the exhibition as well, is this isn't pro or con immigration, pro or con authorized immigration or unauthorized immigration. It just really is about immigration, right? And I think many of us are watching with eagle eyes what's happening in our current presidential administration, which has made, I think, something like this, I hope, a little bit more important if it wasn't before, for people to understand the many reasons why folks have made the decision. And I say that very carefully, decision. Oftentimes it's not a decision, right? It is a matter of life and death for people to make the choice, well, to uproot their family, to save their own lives, right? And push their families forward. So anyway, this map details a little bit about the topography, the environment, particularly if somebody is coming from Central America or South America that is unfamiliar with how different Mexico is throughout each of its ends, right? It's jungle, hot, humid, right? And then you get up north and it's desert and hot, and everything in between. So this details some of the freight train lines that people will use to cross, and we'll get to the freight trains here in a bit. Again, as I mentioned, this is a history exhibit with lots of supporting artwork. I wrote up a very brief and concise, condensed timeline of immigration history to the United States from Mexico to the United States. So this is not an expansive timeline. If I did a timeline to that nature, it could cover this entire room and probably many of the other galleries talking about immigration history to the United States. Again, I wanted people to understand that this is something that has happened for many, many years. And when we think about whatever's being talked about in the news, we are all aware of scare tactics and deportations of people who maybe are unauthorized migrants here. This is not the first time that this has happened in our country's history, right? 1929 through the 1930s, mass deportations of Mexicans and Mexican Americans. So if we think that this is the first time and it can't happen to us, and it already has. It's a lot of text, and sometimes we think whether or not to include lots of text in museum exhibitions, because we know people just won't read it. But I felt it's important to have the information available to people who do choose to read it, so that they can see. We also have a little bit of information on some of the other reasons why people have decided or have moved northward, such as civil wars in Central America, right? Other kinds of forms of political destabilization and difficult economic measures. Mentioned NATO, we mentioned lots of different things. So if you get a chance, and please take pictures of everything. Photos are allowed in this gallery. You're more than welcome to take photos of everything. So if you all can come around this way, and I know it's a big group, so maybe a little bit hard to get everybody situated in front of a selection of doors. I usually start with, well, this door right in front, opening up the show, right? Michael Pratt's Abre la Puerta a Todas las Familias. We can see here, again, the most art history or art curator thing that I'll do is point out the very recognizable symbols of American democracy, right? We have the American flag, we have the Statue of Liberty, some of the text that's on the Statue of Liberty in New York City. And you know, I always like to talk about these tours and make sure everybody keeps in mind that this is a student assignment, right? So I don't know that any of these students ever thought that these would be exhibited in a museum. They have been exhibited before in Washington State. Some of them have been exhibited before at UNM. This is the first time that they're exhibited here at the Albuquerque Museum, but these are really produced for Claudio to grade and for the benefit of their students and the classes to review and look at what each other has produced. And because these were made from their Spanish class, there's a lot of Spanish on the doors, and that was, I think, an intentional part of the assignment, and it was intentional on our behalf not to translate any of it. You know, I mention this as well when I give tours. What is it like when you go into another country and you don't speak the language? And maybe you recognize the letters, but you don't know what words they make when they're put together. So in some kind of very minimal way, what we're hoping that this exhibition also accomplishes for people who don't speak Spanish is, what does that mean? Is it's a very jarring experience to come into a place and you don't know what the words are saying, and it can be very unsettling. And we have the benefit of our technology, right? Yes, open up your Google Translate and type in the words, and then it makes it all the more impactful when you understand what the Spanish says. But we're hoping people just think a little bit about their own place in society. Again, and everybody's privilege, we all have it. So these doors here, in this kind of center platform area, our excellent exhibition designer thought about how can we install these doors, like there's so many of the doors, some of them are double-sided. How can we install these doors to maximize the space, but also make sure we're telling all of the stories? And has everybody, many of you been to the border, to the Juarez El Paso border area? So it's not a wall, right? It's not a solid wall. When you go there, you can see through either like a kind of a fence type thing, or it looks like metal slats in different areas along the border that are like representation of bars. And so this center platform area was designed with that in mind, that you can look through this wall, right? And you can see the other side. We have a really incredible art piece by Ron Rael in our Common Ground exhibition with the teeter-totter that was installed, that children could play with each other and be children, right, on both sides of the border. And this type of design for these doors is intended to mimic some of that as well, right? So when I'm looking across, I can see somebody on the other side. And I can see that they're actually not that different from me. So these doors over here, again, if you all can come around, or when you do finally get to this area, these talk about the experience of immigrant farm workers during COVID-19. And I think for many, if not all of us, we were at home, right? We were working from home, we were learning from home. If you were a first responder, you were not at home. Who were the first responders that we heard about in the news? They were the doctors, they were the police officers, they were the paramedics, right? There are medical professionals. Farm workers were not talked about as our essential workers, right? And we know that they were and that they are because they kept us fed. They keep us fed to this very day. If you are a farm worker working in the fields, it is pretty difficult to be able to maintain a 6-foot distance between you and your coworker, right? If you're picking lettuce at rapid speed, if you're picking strawberries in Oxnard or in Salinas, California, yeah, the lettuce bowl, the salad bowl of the world in Salinas, California. It's really difficult to do that. It's also difficult before COVID, during COVID, and after COVID to have access to regular clean water to be able to wash your hands. right? To be able to take a break. So I think what these doors highlight are those kind of hypocrisies, right? Where we're all maintaining our safe distance, but the people who are keeping us fed and alive and well are unable to maintain those COVID safe distances. And it's not just folks working in the field, it's people working at poultry processing plants, people who are, again, really providing us the nutrients that we need without getting the attention and the respect that they deserve. Not just then, but now and always. Let me see. Okay, so and each one of these text panels are made to look like a door, right? To help with the aesthetic design, just something that I thought I'd point out. And you can read more about which each of these sections are intended to accomplish. But these 4 doors, but really many more of them for that particular year or years maybe in Claudio's classes, talk more about farm workers and their importance here to this country. This part of the exhibition talks a little bit more about what the last time I gave a tour, I would say the previous presidential administration, but that's not true now, but during the first Trump administration, presidential administration, while cages were built during Obama's administration, they became heavily used during the Trump administration, right? This is the Trump zero tolerance policy, where children who are crossing over unauthorized, we do use the language in this exhibition of authorized and unauthorized crossings. The words illegal, the words alien are not allowed in this exhibition, right? This is also something very intentional that we decided to do away with, not just in this exhibition, but I will say in this museum as a whole. So we use unauthorized crossings. We could also say documented or undocumented, but where children are crossing over on unauthorized crossings with adults, either their parents or guardians or a trusted family member, we hope, sometimes crossing over with people who were paid to bring children over. It's illegal to arrest children. So children are separated from their adults. Children that were then put in these detention centers, right? Without being, I want to say tagged, but without being registered to the adult that they came with, right? So immediate separation of children with their adults. As a result, hundreds of, and thousands of children really at the height of all of this were separated from their adults without any way of making sure that they knew where each other was located. I don't know if you've all seen the images in the news where children are huddled together from infants to teenagers, all in the same cage, if you will. So this section is called Kids in Cages, and you see a lot of that being represented here. Children who were in it, this looks like a bird cage, right? The jaula de oro, the golden cage is a phrase that's often used as well. But so if you're crossing over, you have been removed from your child, but there's no tracking to reunite you with your child. It makes it all the more difficult to then be reunited with them when you can be. As of last May, and the number has gone down significantly, there were still over 1,000 children that had not yet been reunited with their parents or their guardians or adults in their families. And you can imagine the kind of incredible, unspeakable trauma that has caused not only those adults, but these children who have no understanding about why they're in that situation and if or when they're ever going to see their families again. The previous presidential administration did work diligently to try to reunite as many children as they could, but this is still a reality that many children are living with to this day. So we'll start over here. I mentioned when I introduced the Red Cross map, the explanation of freight train lines, are there showing you how you can, maybe not how you can board a train, but here's a train available that people use often. If you're migrating from different parts of Mexico, but particularly South America, Central America, the fastest way, and I don't want to say the easiest way, but the fastest way to migrate from and through those jungle parts of Mexico, states of Chiapas, possibly Oaxaca, other states, is to ride the roofs of freight trains. The students have read, I don't know, consistently every year, but certainly very often, Sonia Nazario's book, Enrique's Journey. Has anybody read that? I hope you all read it before next month. We have invited Sonia Nazario to come and give a talk here for free at the Albuquerque Museum. She details the experience of one youth, Enrique, though there are thousands and thousands of Enriques out there, who was without his mother for much of his life. So I'll get into some of that story with the next section, but Enrique had to ride the roof of many freight trains to be able to make it from his home to the United States. And these doors here talk a little bit about the freight train. It's referred to as La Bestia, the beast, right? Because that beast will eat you alive. That beast will kill you. That beast, on top of that beast, you could be robbed. You probably will be robbed. You will be sexually assaulted. You will be thrown off of the roof of that train. While trying to board that beast, you could be maimed, right? The train can run over your legs, your arms, whatnot. So this is, again, an incredibly dangerous experience for the thousands of people who choose to use this mode of transportation to get upward. Walking is probably a really more difficult experience. So riding a train really seems to be the option that a lot of people take. So you can see here, this student, Lillian King, she chose to paint her door representing the train as beast, right? La Tierra de la Libertad in blood, talking about the Southwest United States. This door here pulls from a direct quote from Enrique's Journey. There's a group of women, many groups of women and community members throughout Mexico. This group of women, I think, is referring to Las Patronas, who, even in their own need, their own community need, put together bags of food, tortillas, whatever, and throw them up to people who are on the roofs of these freight trains, right? Recognizing that these people are humans too. And there's a varying opinions, I think, on these unauthorized crossings through Mexico and of course into the United States. Some people don't like it. Some people recognize the humanity and the search for better lives that these migrants are trying to achieve. These last two doors do talk a little bit more about the gangs that currently dominate much of Central America, certain countries in Central America, and have branched out elsewhere. Mara Salvatrucha from El Salvador is one of them. And the many gangs that disrupt migrant journeys, the many gangs that have forced people to flee because they will kill their families or themselves. So some of these doors, again, talk about that. And Mohammed, his door, talks about the MS, the Mara Salvatrucha, and you can access his writing on his QR code. These doors over here talk a little bit more about that family separation. So this section talks about, is called family separation, as well as those two doors at the rear of the gallery. Now, when we think about somebody like Enrique, as part of this Sonia Nazario book, Enrique is but one of the thousands of children whose parents have left them back in their home country. And why would parents do that? It's kind of an incredible thought for those of us who are parents, to think about leaving our children behind. But sometimes that's the only option, right? Because it costs money to send your child to school. It costs money to live in a decent area. So for many parents, or guardians, the thinking that I'll just go to the norte for a little while, maybe a year, maybe 2 years, I'll send the money back, and then I'll be able to bring my family, or I'll be reunited. There's always this really incredible hope. We'll be reunited soon, and I'll keep in touch. I'll call them, we'll exchange letters, I'll send them things, and that constant communication becomes lesser and lesser as time goes on. So this selection of doors do talk about those ties that bind. The students used as multimedia, right? So you can see some push pins, some yarn, some safety pins, as making those ties that really connect somebody who is in this northern area, right, the norte, with their families back home. How do you maintain your relationship with your family members when you're so far away? Because you can't go to birthday parties, right? You can't go to Christmas. You can't be there when your child needs you. And so some of these doors do talk a little bit more about that. And I want to say one of the most incredible things, I probably said that over and over again, is really how brutally honest all of these students are. That they're not sugarcoating anything. You know, they recognize how difficult of a situation is, particularly from those conversations they've had in El Paso at the Cristo Rey church, meeting people who have migrated over. I always love to point out this particular door from Julia Silva, untitled, but you know, if I could make a title for it, I would say Danos Derechos, Cállate no nos importa, right? Where using the symbol of the scissors, using the yarn, using the needle and thread, give us rights, and shut up, you're not important. And where this girl, her mouth is stitched shut. She has, I don't know if this person was angry with the door when they first got it, but maybe made these holes in the door to symbolize bullet holes in this young girl's chest and her body.
The holes were there already.
Okay,
so she
used them.
You used them, yes.
She used them. I mean, and I could read so much into that, but the violence that people experience both on their journey to the United States, excuse me, but certainly when they're here as well. People who are undocumented, unauthorized migrants live, and we hear this often, in the shadows, right? Fearful that if they go to police, if they go seek help in a domestic violence situation or somebody else just assaulting them, that they would be deported, right? And that they would be sent back. So a lot of times people living through their own trauma and living through some horrific experiences, not being able or feeling like they're unable to seek help. This door, the front of the door we saw a moment ago was some of the icons, the symbols of American freedom and democracy. This is, again, that freight train, so keeping in line with these other doors about the freight train. Michael Pratt, excuse me, has painted people on top of the freight train, some looking happy, but we can look a little bit closer and see some people who are laying beside it. You know, maybe they've been pushed off, maybe they have been run over, and we see gallons and jugs of water, things that people are throwing, again, with this community of patronas, boss women, right, who come together and support migrants as they make their journey northward. This section of doors, wait for you guys to come this way. This section of doors, again, another really tragic and horrific thing in the news that you may have been aware of. A few years ago, in 2019, El Paso suffered an incredible attack on many people living in El Paso. Some people maybe who didn't, but El Paso Walmart shooting. This was a hate crime. And I say it was a hate crime because it was determined that this was a hate crime. Somebody from a different part of the United States, in one of the southern states, specifically chose to carry out his hate crime on Mexicans and Mexican Americans, specifically chose this Walmart in El Paso to eliminate them, right? What we say is really powerful. What we say in the news and the media is really, really powerful, and maybe some of us are unable to discern, you know, fact from fiction. I mentioned some of the deportations in the early 1930s where Mexicans, I didn't mention this, but that Mexicans during the Depression years were very heavily blamed for our economic depression in the United States, that they're taking our jobs, that, you know, we need to deport them. That was one of the many reasons that they were deported in that time. This is some of the same rhetoric that we hear not just now, but we have heard for many years in the recent past. So this one individual, motivated by his own hatred of people different from him, came to the El Paso Walmart and shot dead 23 people. 22 of those people were Mexican or Mexican Americans. So he was charged with 23 crimes here for all those people that had passed away. Now these doors talk a little bit about, well, I do talk about the Walmart shooting, but they juxtapose that horrific event with thinking about comic books, right? Thinking about superheroes, thinking about who are the predators, who are the superheroes. The superheroes that we watch in movies all the time, the Marvel, the DC comics, you know, all of those different franchises. We see Captain America here, we see Spider-Man, Spider-Man again, Batman, Superman, who were charged with taking care of the world. And where's our superhero when we needed him or her? I don't see any female superheroes here, but when we needed them the most, right? And again, as I said on the previous section, the way that these students are brutally honest about what they understand that event to have done to the community, what it means to them as well. This massacre, if you will, was carried out during the tax-free weekend at the beginning of the school year, where many families were there shopping for school supplies for their kids. I think it's a week before or after our tax-free weekend here in New Mexico. And so these were families at Walmart. You know, I go to Walmart. I think many go to Walmart, and you can imagine trying to buy your child's lunchbox at Walmart, but instead you're in the middle of this kind of event. Is really sick, I can say. I know that the students also learned a little bit about Mexican art, some of the greats of Mexican art history. I do a little test because I like to see just where people are at with knowing a little bit about their art history. This one student took a cue from Diego Rivera. Is anybody familiar with Diego Rivera? Some of us are. This is a very typical flower vendor scene. I mean, not Batman, but a flower vendor scene that appears in some of Diego Rivera's incredible work. I can reintroduce him as Frida Kahlo's husband. We know who Frida Kahlo is, right? So before Frida Kahlo got the due that she earned, the respect, she was Diego Rivera's wife. A little interesting of a flip of the narrative there. Maybe you don't know Diego Rivera, but you know Frida. So looking at some of the major players in Mexican art history, pairing that with some superheroes, pairing that with this horrific event in El Paso. Anything? No? Okay. Again, some of these students have their QR codes or their student statements available via QR code, so I encourage you to take a deeper dive into what the student was thinking when they were painting their door and reflecting on that. And as I understand it, when Claudio continues to take his students down to El Paso every year, maybe you pay a pilgrimage, a visit to the Walmart.
Yes, we do. Mm-hmm.
To keep that in the minds, right? And it's still an active Walmart. It's still a place where people go, where people gather, where people access their basic needs. So the fact that students continue to visit there, and this is one way where we're not going to forget. Right? Now the doors on the back, the perimeter of the gallery, were a little bit different for me, I must say. This was an assignment in process as we were already starting to curate the exhibition, so I wasn't really sure what to expect. When Claudio told me this was going to be about artificial intelligence, I was imagining all sorts of different things, none of which actually resulted in the doors that you see here. You know, I had my own ideas. I started thinking about, this is why I called it imagination at the border, but I started thinking about my own experiences as I've walked over the border, the bridge there in Juarez and El Paso, as I've driven over it, as I've flown over it, right? What kinds of questions do I get from customs or from immigration as I walk over? How many times am I interrogated? What happens to me when I drive northward from the checkpoint just outside of Las Cruces? And they haven't always been very fun experiences, based on what my name is, based on where I'm coming from, based on what my vehicle looks like. It's not always a simple looking at me, an American, and keep going. It's been a different experience sometimes for me every time. So I was thinking about a lot of the surveillance. For any of you who have ever crossed over on foot and even driven over, you know that they have already taken your photo probably 100 times, and they already know who you are before you even get to the counter, before you even present your passport or whatever it is to authorize. Because of artificial intelligence, because of the development of technology in the last 20 years, especially from 9/11, right, 2001, where everything changed. They already know everything about us, I like to say, not as a conspiracy theorist, but they already know much about us before we get there. Facial recognition software is a reality. But when I learned about the assignment, actually, that many of you are familiar with programs like ChatGPT. Maybe you use it, maybe you don't want to say that you use it. What happens when in a ChatGPT type program you put in keywords? What are keywords when we think of immigrant? We can all do that as a Google search, right? Immigrant, and it spits out lots of different kinds of examples of what immigrant means. If I put in the word like Mexican American, I get a very distinct picture of what Mexican American looks like. But if I put in a word immigrant, and maybe this is what students were doing, immigrant, illegal, right, alien, all of these key words that we hear in the news without any context and without any explanation. Pairing that with some of the, again, I'm not an art historian, but pairing it with some of the lessons and artists of surrealism. You can see some of that surrealism here. We think of Salvador Dali and lots of other artists. What kind of pictures do those pop out at us? And I think what Claudia had mentioned to me, only one student went through with this assignment, feeding in keywords to a ChatGPT type program, and it's spitting back a picture of what it looked like using all of these keywords, right? And other students rejected using an artificial intelligence type program to come up with a picture of what immigration looked like.
I don't know if you guys can tell which picture here is the one that used artificial intelligence. Can you guys tell? They're right. It's right
Hey,
here.
come this way, please. You're all. We can cram in here.
Can you guys guess? Take a guess.
Is it out of all 5 of these?
All of these doors, and even on the end of this wall.
Is this the one with like the skull at the bottom?
You're close, but not quite.
Okay.
It was this one right here.
Yeah.
That was the only one that my student used in artificial intelligence to create an image. But all my students refuse to use it because they feel like that, you know, they went to the border, they say they didn't need artificial intelligence as an artist to express how they felt about their trip. And I actually have a letter from a few of the students that they sent to me that were really upset that I wanted to use artificial intelligence to maybe explore other spaces that haven't been explored when it came to immigration. So, but anyway, this is the only door that actually used artificial intelligence.
The interesting thing I think about this door, knowing that it's the only one, this student was the only one who used artificial intelligence to produce this image, is that you can see and access, it's widely available, a lot of aerial photography, particularly in the Tijuana-San Diego border area where Tijuana is very dry, right? It's very desert, and all of the water has been redirected to San Diego and those communities around San Diego where it's very lush and green. I wouldn't say the same thing for El Paso and Juarez necessarily because it's all desert, but you can see the difference in development from the US side versus the Mexico side, right? And it's a stark difference. So I think it's interesting that AI came up with this, that this is an image that we see anyway. So that program needs a little bit more tweaking, I think, to come up with some original. I always like to talk about this door. Claudio and other people who've been through this tour with me hear this ad nauseum, but this particular door, I think, really pulls on my heartstrings. All of them do, but this one does in a little bit different ways. I think Ava was, she was thinking about Georgia O'Keeffe. We all know who Georgia O'Keeffe was. We all know about her art, her vast landscapes, her desert landscapes, the use of skulls and different kinds of bones and that kind of thing. the way I understand the story is that Ava, when her class went to El Paso, when they were interviewing migrant families and migrants, came in to interview one woman who was from Colombia, who had recently migrated with her 2 children, and had talked to Ava about some of the horrors that she faced in her long journey. And if you can imagine this, from Colombia to Juarez, right, to El Paso, this is a very long journey, crossing all of Central America, crossing through all of Mexico with 2 small children at her side. Taking care of yourself is difficult enough, but taking care of the needs of your 2 babies, really, your 2 children, in addition, is just something that is so incredible. But she talked about this woman who, ran out of water, and I think a lot of times, people are unsure because they have not made that journey, how in desperate need they need to be aware of their water intake, right? Especially crossing vast deserts. And this woman ran out of water, was drinking some water from the Rio Grande. Probably not a good idea for anybody to drink water from any river, honestly, because we just don't know what's in those rivers, but had seen bodies floating in the river, victims of this migratory experience. And I do like to better use the word victims, because that is exactly what they are, victims. Victims who pass away in the desert for hypothermia or hyperthermia, right? Victims who die because of any kind of violence enacted upon them, people that they trust to help them cross over that don't, other people taking advantage of them. But in this particular case, this mother drank contaminated water, really, from the Rio Grande, and started hallucinating, I think, when she fell asleep.
It was in the...
Where was it?
It was not Rio Grande. It was the river that runs along with the Darien Gap.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Contaminated water nonetheless, and had hallucinatory dreams, right, where she was dreaming of the water, but it was actually blood as a river, right, the river of blood, and that's the name of this. Seeing other people dead in the desert and that kind of thing. Well, Ava heard from this woman that when maybe she woke up the next day, or maybe soon after she drank this water, she had what we would call manchas. She had sores that appeared all over her face because of this contaminated water. Unfortunately, she did not let her 2 children drink this same water. I think that's was the story. So Ava has painted this mother, and we can recognize this as very kind of Christian stained glass, right, that we see in many historic churches. The mother is the image of the Virgin Mary. The mother is painted with these manchas all over her face. The mother is holding the hand of her young daughter and holding her baby in her arms. Part of the story that I also am familiar with is that as they were crossing up from parts of Mexico, through Central America and Mexico, riding the roof of this freight train, that she had to tie her infant to her leg with her shoelaces so that the baby wouldn't fall off, and so she could hold her younger daughter in her arms. So again, I think of the incredible privilege that I have standing before you right now, that I have had standing in front of every group that I've had the privilege of giving a tour to, knowing that I can go home and hug my kids, and put them to bed, or, whatever, have pizza with them. And that I didn't have to have the same experience just to give them a better life. So I think for this project, many years that Claudio has done this tirelessly, and I know he's exhausted, but tirelessly, showing our youth, one class at a time, the realities that many people face, and hoping that when they walk away from this experience, long after they've painted their doors once they get back to school, right, that they walk away being better humans, more compassionate and empathetic people, seeing the humanity in people that they meet, knowing that they may not know the circumstances by which people are here, but that they're here. And hopefully by them being here is making a difference to their families in the long run. And I think to finish it up with that little comment, that phrase, to finish it up, We're gonna go back to this first corner, kind of where we started. So sorry, I'm getting your way. Not to step over you. Yeah, I'm gonna be right here. It's a little difficult area to get to, but what we decide to do for the betterment of our families, we get rewarded tenfold right down the line, generationally speaking. And I know that this is a labor of love for Claudio because this is also his story. And we wanted to highlight that. So it's not just a class assignment. This wasn't something that just a teacher thought of doing and it would be great. It's actually, let me bring you into the experience. Let us bring you into the experience that Claudio and his family have also had in their family history. So we have a little homage, if you will, to Claudio's dad, Senor Antonio Perez Sanchez, who migrated from Guanajuato. I think you can tell your family story a little bit better than I can. I was asking Claudio a bunch of questions, right? Like, tell me about your dad. Call him, you know. I need these answers because I wanted to write it down for people. I wanted people to understand that this is something deep within that Claudio is sharing with everybody else. And to know that his dad was a bracero worker, right? We're familiar maybe with the bracero program, guest worker program, agreement between the United States and Mexico really to accommodate the labor shortage of World War II, but that continued until 1964, 1965. But that Claudio's father was one of those braceros that was sent to the United States to work in the agricultural area, to work many men into the industrial sector in the Midwest, leaving his wife and his children behind in Guanajuato, Claudio included. Eventually being able to be reunited with his family and bringing them to the United States so that they could all be together. So he won, right? For many parents who cannot be reunited with their families is a tragic story. And in this case, this was a successful story, I would say, where Claudio's siblings went to college, right? Everybody is successful because of the sacrifices of his dad and his mom.
Yeah, there's 11 of us, so half of us, yeah, I know. There's 11 of us, and half of us went to college, and the other half, I have a few brothers that retired from working in the fields, but I still have one brother who's 60 years old, and he's still working in the fields, and he's been working in the fields since he was 16 years old. And I asked him earlier, a couple of days ago, I said, when are you gonna retire, Antonio? He goes, until my body gives up. So he didn't give me a number, so he's still working.
So we have some photos that we reproduced of Mr. Sanchez working in the fields in Greenfield, California. For those of you who are unfamiliar with this part of California, Salinas, Greenfields, Salinas more specifically, John Steinbeck country. If you've read Grapes of Wrath or of Mice and Men or any of those books, this is where John Steinbeck came from. Many of the streets are named after him. And if you look, and you don't have to look very carefully as you're driving through Highway 101, you will see people working in the fields. This is not something that we see on a massive scale here in New Mexico, certainly not in the Albuquerque or northern New Mexico region. And it is, again, a very incredibly humbling experience. And to know people who have worked in the fields, young people who work in the fields to be able to buy their school clothes, is again a very humbling experience.
Yeah, I worked in the field since I was a 7th grader, all the way to high school. Even during when I was a senior, I would skip French, and there was a strawberry field in front of the school, so I would go there and work for like 2 or 3 hours to make some money because my dad didn't have any money to give me, and that's why I flunked French a couple of times. But I mean, afterwards, after I graduated from high school, I worked a little bit more, and I decided that the field was not for me, so that's why I decided to go back to college. Yes.
Yeah, it's again just very. This is difficult, but these are people's life stories. These are people's people's origin stories in the United States sometimes. And we're thrilled to be able to offer this to our visitors. And I don't know, did you talk to them about the Hugs novels?
Yes, I did.
Okay, so, you know.
And the students came and spoke to them
Good.
too.
Yeah. So the ways in which that Claudio, through his own initiative, with the support of Sandia Prep, has been able to show these students a whole different world than they would typically get. You know, so many of our students don't have access to this kind of experience, and these prep students do, which is a wonderful, wonderful thing. But